Marion, what's going on? Welcome to Cannabinoid Connect.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, really excited to be talking with you today. Before we started recording, you mentioned, I think the number was 29 or 30 states that Simplifya now has a footprint in. That's pretty remarkable. Pretty impressive.
Thanks. Yeah, we've been at this since 2016, and as you know, Kevin, we're a reg tech company, so lots of lawyers and policy folks and engineers, and so it takes a lot of time to stay updated with the regs and keep on top of all the things that operators rely on us for. So it's 29 or 30 states. I'm not sure. I think we may have added a new one here recently, but yep, and continue to grow as more
Yep.
states come online. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to start things off with the reg tech industry or market overall. But before we do, let's just talk about that, the inception of Simplify in 2016, you mentioned. So how did it all come about? I mean, I understand that the founders of Vicente Cederberg are also helped found the
Yeah.
company. So yeah, tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about the history.
Yeah. So 2015, I guess, fall. So I knew the partners at Vicente Cederberg, and over some conversations, I had sold. So I come from tech, but I had sold a tequila company, and I was kind of looking for the next big thing, and ran into some of the partners, and they're like, "Hey, cannabis is something where everyone should be looking at," and they actually had an idea as to what was to become Simplifya. They were a law firm that was seeing quite a bit of opportunity and growth, and they've been in the forefront of a lot of these kind of legalization of states. And so we started talking about, how can we create a more efficient, cost-effective way for operators to maintain compliance, from an operational perspective. And so we started building what was to become Simplify from ground up, the technology itself, and put a lot of processes and procedures into place about how we're going to ingest all these regs and how we're going to simplify it down and to make it extremely easy. And here we are, a little over 6 years later, still cruising along. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you touched on you were a prior alcohol guy, selling a tequila company. So did you have any prior experience with cannabis? I mean, did you consume previously, or is this kind of a new world for you altogether?
it was a new world. I mean, I'm a casual consumer of cannabis. I would say just recreationally, maybe once a month or so. But I certainly saw that the medical aspects of it, but also I think the recreational aspects, not to mention, I think job creation, the tax revenue, and all these things that were to come, as value add for being, creating a new industry. And so jumped right on it, and
Right.
it's been a great ride. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's exciting time to be part of the industry, even though there are some definite challenges happening,
Yeah.
not only within the current economic climate that we're in, but just the added regulations and red tape, which is really pertinent for this conversation. So let's dive right in and let's talk about the reg tech market. From my understanding, it's an estimated 57.5 billion by 2032. So tell me a little bit about, how Simplify approaches the reg tech market and what's a differentiator for the company among the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so RegTech, essentially, it's we're a SaaS company, obviously, and RegTech, exists, I think, to create efficiencies, as I kind of alluded to earlier, Kevin. Um, our goal is ingesting all these regs, as states kind of publish them, simplifying it down to a 12th grade reading level. That's literally kind of the benchmark that we hit. Because the idea there is, if you don't have lawyers or folks that are, come from a law background, they need to be able to understand exactly what these regs are saying, right? And so we ingest that, simplify it down, and convert them into audit questions. And I think RegTech is going to continue to play a really big part as this industry expands, primarily because of the efficiency and the cost savings that it brings, right? Because right now, I think oftentimes in the industry, people are using law firms, which is a great way clearly to stay compliant. But the cost of a lawyer coming in, giving you all that information that you need to know, doing your audits and site visits, that gets quite expensive. And so software has come into play there to ensure that whether you're a small operator or a large MSO, whether you have a big budget and a big compliance team or you have a small team, you can actually stay on top of all that, right? So it's similar to fintech. It's like cannabis industry with companies like Shield Compliance, right? They use the banks use Shield Compliance to be able to like monitor funds and where they're coming from, and all that good stuff that happens behind the scenes. And RegTech similarly does that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how you say, I mean, it simplifies the process, right? Simplify it. It simplifies and distills information to, like you said, a 12th grade reading level, makes this stuff really easy to access and to comprehend.
Yep.
And with obviously so much buzz around generative AI, are y'all testing any of those types of advanced technologies to help even further distill the information and make it, easy to understand?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an R&D team that is playing around a lot with AI. However, I have to say, because of the risks involved here, there isn't much room for error, right? Because essentially, what we put out as when we ingest all these regulations by state and we simplify it down, um, there's one way of looking at it, right? Because you can just read the regs as it is and be like, it's not actionable. It just tells you a bunch of legal jargon, and then you kind of decipher what it's trying to say. Versus what we do, take a paragraph of legal, literature and basically make it understandable for even a simple person like myself, right? So when you use I don't think our testing with it still hasn't gotten us to where we feel comfortable with it. And I don't know if we will, it's always going to require some from human interaction work. I think it can still kind of distill down some of that lingo, but I don't think it's not smart enough yet from what we've seen to be able to completely rely on AI. That's a long way of saying it, but we're testing it. Not comfortable with it anytime soon, I don't think.
That was my guess of what you were gonna say, right? Because the technology is so new. We're obviously seeing some flaws and some errors where AI needs to be trained, it needs to be programmed, it has to be, so it needs to run through a rinse and repeat quite several times, and it's so I was just curious, and that's great that
Yeah.
you guys are testing, and
No, we are testing, and I mean,
innovative.
end of the day, kind of we like to be an innovative company. We're constantly producing new products. However, because of the risk involved, right? So our operators rely on us to stay on top of those regs and help them understand it. And it's we can't let them down. So we got to stay very true to that.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
Well, let's also talk about, robust reg tech and its potential impact for the cannabis industry, and more specifically, like how it relates to safe banking, when that passes. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about what we can expect from reg tech and how it'll play a part in really adding value within the banking system.
Yeah, so I think safe banking. Even there's so many things that we need from a kind of more of a federal movement to help kind of catapult this industry back, right? But I think, for example, right now through some of our banking partners that we provide products for, um, we're trying to figure out how to minimize the level of governance and compliance. Right now, banks, for example, they go on site visits, right? So if you're an operator that they bank, they want to ensure that you're compliant, but the bank is held accountable by their regulators, right? And so they spend quite a bit of time and money going on site visits to the operators to ensure that there's good governance and compliance. Now, in walks RegTech paired up with fintech, like again, as I mentioned earlier, like Shield. What you have is a lot of technology that takes out a lot of that guesswork, but also streamlines that entire process. So if, if an operator is using Simplifya, and they call it send in biannual audits. Now, the bank can say when their regulators walk in, here's where all of our cannabis businesses are housed within the software. Here's all the audit reports that we require of them. Here's how they stand up, and here's how they're passing them, and therefore mitigating the risk. Right. End of the day, I think fintech, regtech, all these things are there to mitigate risk, not just for the operator, but anyone that's serving them. Insurance, banks, even end of the day, government wants to mitigate risk not only for themselves, but safety and security for consumers as well as the operator. So it's it
Mm.
it plays already a very critical role in the industry, but I think it's going to play even more of a role as we expand into more and more states. Yeah.
Mhm. That makes sense when you talk about, how fintech and reg tech are so closely aligned. It should be streamlined, right? And in the B2B tech world, it's so important that these platforms or these SaaS companies or software solutions talk to each other, they integrate, right? So is Simplify thinking about that, from an integration from like a fintech perspective and some of these other ancillary businesses where, like you said, it could really help the end customer?
Yeah, so we do work closely with some fintech companies, and we haven't gotten as far as integrating just yet because, again, I think the cannabis industry, Kevin, as you know quite well, is still very new, and so things are evolving, on a day-to-day basis, as you know. So I think I mean, yes, we've come a long way from kind of initial inception of legalization of cannabis, but I think there's still a little bit more room for some maturity before we kind of figure out, because one of the tough things is you go and integrate and do all these things based on how things are operating now, and then it pivots or changes down the road. So we are working closely with fintech companies, and banks, but I think we haven't done the full integration part of it yet because I don't think we're ready just yet.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. You're just it's kind of a wait and see moment, right? I mean, there hasn't even been much movement at the federal level. So
Yeah,
it's a different case by case within the states. So,
it is, and I think it's just so while we can figure out with our fintech partners, like, hey, here's where Simplify adds value, here's where you're adding value to the banks, and then that combination of, even if we're doing it kind of manually and understanding each other's role in this ecosystem, then I think it'll just set it up for much better, tighter knit kind of integration and working down the road.
mhm. Well, outside of integrations, I mean, what type of synergies are y'all creating within the industry? I think I saw a press release talking about the Risk Mitigation Alliance.
Yeah. So we're super excited about that, Kevin. Thanks for asking me about that. So, you know, I think just like any other industry, I think cannabis, because of the fact it's so highly regulated, is a lot of risk, right? And if you look at insurance, if you look at banks, almost anyone that serves the license operator, they're looking for ways to, lessen their risk. And insurance is a very risk averse industry, and we're a risk mitigation tool. And so a couple of years ago, started having some conversations, with some of kind of the big leaders in the insurance space, CanGen and Hub and these guys. And we were trying to figure out how can Simplify be utilized as a risk mitigation tool for the operators. And the long and short of it was that if Simplify is being used by an operator, there's a good assumption that insurance and the underwriters can make that they're buttoned up in other areas of the business, right? Because regulatory and operational compliance, which is what Simplify does, focuses on many areas of the business. And so if you're doing something that's so time consuming and costly and arduous, well, then the idea is that you're running a very tight ship in terms of your business. And so Risk Mitigation Alliance was formed as a way to say that if you use Simplifya, then insurance is willing to actually subsidize 70% of the cost of Simplifya as a way to entice or encourage people to be compliant. And when they're compliant, then insurance is, able to actually take a look at their business more closely and say, hey, are they less of a risk? And because you're using this tool, then we can give you a preferred pricing or some sort of discount on your premiums. And so that concept, after 2 years of walking through it, now Risk Mitigation Alliance has launched, and we have tons of different conversations that are happening at this very moment. And the great thing about this is, given kind of the way the markets are and the struggle within the cannabis industry, this really helps, save substantial amount of money for these operators who are already hurting. So super exciting stuff.
Yeah, it seems like it definitely streamline it for these operators, and they're rewarded, right, within this ecosystem of solution providers that are just interconnected. I mean, at some point, you're going to need to think about insurance after you've, obtained certain levels of compliance or regulatory compliance, right? I mean, anything around that ecosystem. And to your point, these insurance providers like CanGen will better understand, if you're risk averse or not. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So, even other carriers like Safer, right? I mean, these are big companies that have, that want to serve the cannabis industry. And so they're here to say, look, we'll, write your risk, but help us kind of help you. That's kind of the concept, right? And so when you take insurance, I've always been of the mind, Kevin, that compliance, insurance, banking, even tax and accounting, these are really key elements to running any business. And what do they all have in common? It's about risk mitigation, right? Especially, like, again, in a highly regulated industry. And so we've even been having lots of conversations with, the tax and accounting experts at Cohn Resnick. Same thing with insurance, which is why I mentioned also banks. Like, if you're an operator and you want to create a long, sustainable business, these kind of four stools to the chair are extremely important, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Well, let's switch gears. I want to talk to you a little bit about the inevitable consolidation, right? That we're currently seeing in the space, and what you're seeing from Simplifya's perspective in terms of the host of regulatory challenges that consolidation brings.
Yeah, I think, the consolidation part of it, I think naturally is going to happen, primarily because just the compression in the margins, right? I mean, I think the smaller operators are, don't have the type of financing that they need to kind of sustain through this type of climate in terms of the markets. And so, they're sometimes, I think, being forced into selling to the larger operators. And um, it's unfortunate, or it can be fortunate in how that's working, but it is happening. And I think, again, and I'm sorry, I missed the second part of your question there, Kevin.
Well, just what are the challenges from a regulatory standpoint that consolidation brings from Simplify's perspective? What are you seeing as
Oh,
consolidation is happening?
yeah. So, when we first started Simplify, the concept of a multi-state operator wasn't even there, right? Because they were much more the small and mom and pop type of shops. And now with consolidation, it's, MSOs and these larger entities are popping up. And so from our perspective, it's just we're constantly having to tweak the technology, right? And not just tweak, but also overhaul quite a bit. Because, when we first started off, as I mentioned, it was Simplify was designed for what was around at that time. But now it's needs to have been adapted for, organizations that are like the size of Curaleafs or the Jushis of the world. And so that, I wouldn't say poses an issue, but, we're constantly adapting our product set based on that. And I think the regulations are also, new states are looking at existing states and trying to change what's working, what's not. So it's constantly evolving, right? Just like
Hmm.
any new industry, and cannabis is seeing exactly that at the moment.
Right. Regulatory and compliance software solutions like Simplifya, um, they're obviously an integral part of like the local government, right, or the state government, because obviously cannabis isn't federally legal. But um, tell me, when cannabis is legal at the federal level, how Simplifya will really benefit the federal government in terms of government oversight, and how you see the company partnering and working with the federal government from a compliance and regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, so even now, we work very closely with regulators as much as we can. However, I think when some sort of federal legalization or whatever happens, I think it's still going to be, my opinion is it's still going to be left quite a bit to the state. So you're going to have the state regulations, right, and the local municipality regulations, and I think you're just going to have another layer on top of that with federal. Um, so I think even now when we have conversations with state level or local level regulators, we try and say we exist to try and make their jobs easier and the operators' jobs easier, right? Because at this point, Simplify has been around long enough where we've heard kind of great stories where a regulator walk in and or an enforcement officer, and they're like, you immediately pull out your Simplify audit report, and they're like, okay, they recognize the company, they know like the standards that Simplify is able to bring to the operator, and so there's some feel good stories, if you will. So in that similar type of vein, I think on the federal level, when that happens, if and I suspect at some point when it happens, I think we have plenty of history and data to help suggest like, hey, here's how we think enforcement should go from a federal level if that happens. We actually were working very closely with the state of New York last year on, they were very curious as to our input of how operators have been using Simplify, what sort of percentage of audits come out where they are passing and failing. And so while we don't share client names, we certainly have data points that we can say like, here's how often it's being used and how it's being used and so forth. So I think we have plenty of valuable insight that we can give them.
Yeah. I mean, data is king these days, right? And you're sitting on a mountain of data. So
Yeah, a little over 6 years of it.
yeah, no, that's great. That's definitely an asset for sure. I want to touch a little bit more on that and ask you about, you know, where you see the industry headed, say in 2 years, and what is Simplify focused on? It's May 1st of 2023, but what are some goals that the company has set? And what are you working from an innovation standpoint? Like, what's in the future?
Yeah. So, our primary goal is to ensure that the licensed operators maintain compliance, right? Their most valuable asset, Kevin, for a licensed operator is that license. And so, what does Simplify set out to do? Help them preserve that. Now, that being said, we also recognize the value that banks bring into this ecosystem, as I mentioned earlier, insurance, tax, accounting, law firms, payroll companies, money transport, all these different areas of the industry that come together to support the licensed operator. Slowly but surely, we now have started working with each one of those different types of arms, if you will, in the industry. And so we have products for them, but the ultimate goal is to support the licensed operator. And I think, for us, 2 years down the road, we've been kind of screaming about this for quite some time at from the top of the mountain, and that is, uh, if everyone plays by the rules, has good governance, is compliant, or at least as many as we can hope are compliant, then it's just going to make other states and legalization easier. On the federal side, all those things that people that have been opposing any sort of federal legalization really don't have much to say about, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what have we done effectively at that point? We've brought this product into the legal market, right? It's got a ton of medical benefits. It's got a ton of recreational benefits from the standpoint of people that just want to relax and chill, whatever the case may be. But we've put the right guardrails and we've set up an infrastructure within, this new industry to ensure that it's used safely, compliantly, and communities are safe. So it just advances, I think, the industry as a whole. If everyone, I know no one wants to talk about compliance because it's like the least sexiest topic in the industry, but I think it's a must-have across the board, right? Again, it's a risk mitigation tool, and if everyone does that well, then I think we're just going to keep seeing, a more favorable standing from the federal side, and I
Mm-hmm.
think globally as well.
Yeah, and compliance may not be sexy, right? But education in a lot of ways is. So,
Yes.
what is Simplify doing from an education standpoint in terms of, really helping to advance the industry?
So, we certainly go to the conferences, we put on webinars just talking about the importance of compliance. We have a lot of great law firm partners, even in addition to Vicente Cederberg, that we work with. And I think they're saying the same thing, right? It's like if you are compliant and you play by the rules and you do it really well, it's not only going to help save your business, but it's going to help progress this industry. And I don't know if you saw, but I think, California recently had one of the highest fines for a non-compliant business. It was $123 million, right? And why even risk that type of a fee or penalty, or risk losing your license by doing something that wasn't compliant? It just doesn't make sense. And I think New York Mayor Adams also, I think recently, I think today, as a matter of fact, I think I saw a press release on that where they're going to step up enforcement. I think the problem in existing states was they didn't have the budget and they were waiting for federal legalization for additional funding. But I think every state recognizes that they have to maintain enforcement if you want to keep this movement going. And yeah, all comes down to compliance in some way, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, now for sure, but in the future, absolutely, right? Again, when we go back
Yeah.
to federal reform and the government stepping in and
Yeah.
overseeing this, I mean, it's going to be a must. And like you talked about earlier, data, having your, all your processes, SOPs kind of organized
Yes.
in a certain way that you can easily access and provide, will all be beneficial.
Well, and I think also, as more M&A happens, Kevin, the acquirers, as more and more, kind of Wall Street types come into the industry, they're going to expect, what have you done historically for, good governance and compliance? Like, what sort of risks am I buying as a potential buyer, right? And so those are all data points as an operator, I think, that you should maintain, and you can start showing that today, right? Here's what I've done. You have all that historical data, and compliance really comes down to historical data. Have you done it well? And do you continue to do it well? Right. And I think that also will help with valuations as more and more M&A happens. Because I think like any other industry, we kind of start and we kind of figure out our, how we're going to go. But as the industry gets more and more sophisticated, it's going to be a must. And that's kind of the nature of the way it's going to go.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, the M&A and the consolidation we touched on earlier, that's happening now, right? I mean,
Yes.
federal
Yes.
reform is in the future. We know it's a matter of when, not if, but
Perfect.
that's a really great point. Yeah. Marion, what have we not touched on before we wrap up? I want to leave you with the floor. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with, things that are top of mind, or yeah.
No, I mean, I think, again, Kevin, I appreciate you having me on here. I think the key element that we've been saying for a long time, and I'll just kind of recap that is that whether you're a small operator or a large MSO, I think for the betterment of your business now and also in the future for when an M&A transaction or you go to sell it, compliance needs to be the key focus of not only your business but for the industry. I think if we're going to advance this industry, we're going to get to a point where, to your point, when federal legalization happens, the more buttoned up we are as a whole, it's just going to make it better. And so, thank you for giving me this time to talk about this topic, which it's not the most riveting thing, but I guess it's okay.
Hey, I enjoyed it, man. You're very knowledgeable in the space, and whether we like it or not, compliance is important, especially within the cannabis industry. So,
Yeah.
any insight that we can get is super valuable. I know for not only me but for the listeners and the viewers. So, Marion, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Look forward to seeing Simplify continue to grow and expand its footprint. And yeah, man, best of luck to you guys.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me on the show. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, yes, and thank you all for listening. Bye.